I have a student who traveled with me in one of my early years, and he's going to college in New York. And he wrote me an email and said it's because of how much he loved, as soon as we came up out of the subway in the city the first time, he just knew this was the place for him. And that changed his whole life. And I'm really excited to see how, what he ends up doing, because I know that, this opportunity is what sparked his interest in being there.
Political science major, and he right now is running a campaign at home until he goes back to school, but at least through the primary. And I have another who also wants to run for office, but is doing his graduate degree in political science. And they will say history and the Washington, D.C. trip and being there and saying, I want to come back and I want to work here.
And my favorite part of the trip is hearing the kids come to me and say, Coach Walker, I know exactly what I want to do. I want to be a marine biologist. And so the ladies that work at the Dolphin Care Center are always very upfront. Hey, you might not make a lot of money in this, but we don't do it for the money. And so after all this time, I have had one student come back. She actually attends University of Florida, and her goal is to be a marine biologist one day. And so it really, truly is fascinating. And I love when the kids come back and say, hands down, middle school science trip to Florida was the best trip that they've ever taken.
Around 2011, I had taken a student that was more of a problem student at school. His mom actually came along as a chaperone on the trip. So during that trip, I noticed that there was a different side of him. He was really just kind of taking everything in, and we were in DC. And then a couple of years ago, I ran into his mom at church, and I said to her, I heard that your son graduated from boot camp. And she said, yeah. And it was that trip to DC that actually got him thinking about the military and got him excited about it. And so I thought that was, a really fun story to learn, and what a big impact it must have made on him.
I saw a kid I had in class, 5 years ago, and I happened to see him just a couple of weeks ago. The kid now goes to George Washington University. I said, oh, GW, DC, great town. And he's like, well, it was the 8th grade trip. That's where I first thought just Washington, D.C. was just fabulous. I had such a great time. It was the first time I started thinking about maybe going to school for political science or getting involved with government. I had another kid send me an email a couple of years ago. He sent me a picture. He was landing in Washington, D.C. And he sent me a picture from the plane of Washington. He said, hey, Mr. Casey, it's so-and-so. I don't know if you remember me. I had him, probably 10 years ago. He's like, just want to let you know, that I'm working in D.C. now. I think he was working for a lobbyist firm or something. And he's like, it was the Washington trip that sort of started my road to where I am today. And so I think the trip really is very impactful for kids. Again, it takes what we're doing in the classroom and it makes it real. And I think sometimes those experiences are really more powerful than anything I can do in the classroom.
So how many times have you been into an elevator and people are having a conversation and you dare not interfere with this conversation? It's just something you don't do. So I'm on vacation, the elevator doors open, I walk in the middle of a dialogue between a professionally dressed woman and a tourist. And she's explaining the what to do's in Washington, D.C. Well, chiming in, my words came out uncontrollably. I love D.C. I take students there every year. And she stopped mid-sentence. She opened her eyes wide, tilted her head as if to say, dude, you interrupted me. But, my wife says I do that a lot. But in reality, what she did say is she goes, I loved that trip. And I'm like, okay. I went on that trip with my friends and it rocked my world. You tell your students when they go to Washington, D.C., it will change their life like it did me. I knew that when I went to the nation's capital, this is where I wanted to work, and I wanted to work in politics. Tell your students this story. I shall.